Welcome to the Hunter's Campfire. G'day, my name is Mark van den Bogart, hunter, fisherman, writer and storyteller. With me is Ian Hurley, technologist, hunter, hunting mentor and proud father. Together we want to help you get hunting. Our focus is helping you make the most of public land hunting right here in Australia, even if you don't live in a state where it's offered. This podcast series is all about helping you get started, helping you build your knowledge and your confidence so you can get out there and live your own hunting adventures. Now, let's get started. So, good evening, Ian. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Another cold night. That's all right. Getting used to these now.
Yeah, it's pretty wet here at the moment, and I reckon we've got a few more days of it. It's not so cold. It doesn't get, with the rain, it does kind of mild out the evening temperatures. The daytime temperatures are much lower, but it miles out the evening temperatures, so it's not too bad. Pretty
bitterly cold. We've had a good run of it. It's been good rain, actually. I was talking to a grazier today as part of what I do in my day job, and he said, I can't believe we're complaining about the water. He said, but they're getting so far behind with all of the mud build-up and what have you. And but yeah, like we've had a bit of drizzle and bits and pieces, but it was certainly a very cold wind coming through. So hopefully that'll scare some mice away.
Or just freeze them in the field.
Yeah, that's the go, little buggers.
Okay, so I understand that you used some of my in-depth discussion on Purdy last week as an introduction. So that being the case, I'm going to give you another introduction on antique firearms before we begin. And so what we have here.
Oh, goodness. Pick him up.
Just trying to get it in the camera view there.
Look at that. Oh,
okay.
That's in perfect view, mate. That's in perfect view.
Perfect view. So
yep.
And I'll just spin around the back there so you can see a bit of decorative work there.
So is this a replica or is this the real deal?
So what we have here is a James Barber Flintlock officer's pistol. Probable build date somewhere between 1726 and about 1740. So very much the real deal. So, getting close to 300 years old, getting close.
Right. Okay. So for those that don't cast their minds back 300 years, I'm actually reading books by, I forget the name of the author, Punk, Punke. He was the author of the movie, I've got to remember the name of it now, was the Leonardo DiCaprio movie where he got mauled by a bear and
The Revenant.
What's the name of it? The Revenant. So the author of The Revenant was actually on the Meat Eater podcast the other day when I was driving into Brisbane, and I was fascinated listening to this guy talking to Ranella. And anyway, so I went and bought The Revenant and read it, and there's a lot of stuff in there about the Flintlock and the old rifles and the things that they used to use, not being described as old rifles because in their day they were quite modern. And then I picked up his latest book that's just been released called Ridgeline, and it's about one of the worst defeats in American history to the Indians, where they coerced a group of soldiers that were told never to cross that ridgeline, and they crossed that ridgeline, and it's the last they were ever seen. But a lot of Flintlock stuff in it. So back to my question, sorry. If it was 300 and something years old, where did it come from, and in what sort of battles or history would it have been involved in?
Okay, so as I said, it's 17. The earliest it could be, and I can tell you relatively definitively, is 1727, and it's because we're working kind of backwards, built up to around the 1740s. And so how do I know that? Well, on the lock plate, it's hard to see, is the name Barber. It's Barber. Barber. And the reason we know about that person is we can actually look that person up, and we can understand the history of that person, and so we can then date this gun, because that one of the joys of English gun making is that England had for many hundreds of years a guild of gun makers. So there is very good records, and even if those records are, you know, they're a little sketchy, you at least get a picture of that person. So the reason I know that 1727 was that James Barber, who made this, he started using that name in 1727. Before that, he used an anglicized version, so it was an ER. His true name was AR. So when the AR appears on a James built, you can know when it started. So he didn't use that before 1727. The other thing is on the proof stamps, there's actually his personal stamp. So there's the guild stamps, which are the proof and the mark stamp, but there's also his, which identifies it as one of his pistols. So by knowing that it's one of his pistols, by that identifying mark, and by understanding the name on the plate and the spelling he used in this particular instance, we can get a start date. The 1740s, 1750s is because of the style. That style, which is called, just get that in camera there, an officer's pistol, started to fade out of usage by the late 1750s, because that's when in the English army, or the army of the English Empire, started to use patterned pistols. So someone would have asked for this to be made. This would have been a commission piece. An officer, because an officer in the English army had to fit themselves out. It was the requirement of, so they would have asked for that to be made. And by about 1760, even the guns that they asked to be made were basically based on the current pattern. So you just got like a much better version, or a hand-built version of what was not mass-produced, but at least batch-produced pistols. So, and certainly things around the scroll work and the shape of the barrel gives it that kind of time frame around that, up to around the 1750s. Really couple of interesting things. You can see the big flare at the barrel, at the butt end there, and that use of the brass that runs all the way up. That's because the English actually used to train to use a pistol as a club with the sword. So after your first shot, you would actually turn it around like that in your non-blade hand and actually use it to parry. So this idea was this was actually going to get hit probably by a sword. You're actually going to use it as a parry. So you didn't kind of just shoot and drop it. You kept on using it, and that's why in a lot of the pistols you see the brass all the way around protecting the grip, because they're actually using it that way. That's my oldest. That's my oldest pistol.
That's a nice piece, isn't it?
It's, look, for the age of it, it's a remarkable piece. You know, it's still, I won't dry fire it because it's very scary, but it cocks, and if I do, it will release. I'm not going to let it slip. You shouldn't dry fire it new. You don't dry fire something 300 years old. But yeah, no. It's wise. The barrel's still clear. The everything, it would still work.
Would or does? Have you dared try?
No.
You wouldn't want to risk it.
No, that's it. If I wanted, if I wanted to have that fun, I could buy something and go from there. So, and I got plenty more to look at. So we'll go through one each week. And look, next week,
that's nice.
When you're talking about, the Revenant, actually, I've got a trade pistol which kind of has some linkage to that. So we'll have a look at that next week.
That's good. In other news, COVID smacked us down again, sadly. So you've got a pending trip that's coming up, and we're waiting on bated breath as to whether you'll be allowed out of the state, which is a bit of sad news.
Yeah, look, I'm working on the theory that I'm going.
That you should.
that's that. That's it. We're going to be loaded. We're going to be packed. We're going to be ready to go. And as soon as we can go, we'll go. We'll do all the necessary paperwork, and we'll get it done. We're not going to any of the significant areas. We go obviously, we're going to regional areas, but we've still got to jump through some hoops. But we're working on the fact that we're going. It's a trip that I usually take my son with me every year. We've decided we're not going to do that simply because it's just going to be two. It's going to be two guys, jumping in the car, driving all night type thing. So we won't be taking my boy, which is a bit of a shame, but I'll have another hunting trip with him this year sometime. So that's the only real downside. I won't be taking him, and this would have been his 4th year away too. So
he'll be missing out. That's for sure.
So
what part of the country were you heading to?
So we were heading into what's called the Upper Hunter, New South Wales.
So heading down to New England.
Yeah. So the bottom of the New England past Tamworth there, where and where we go is that you literally pass the Upper Hunter sign, like you are now entering the Upper Hunter, and then we're off the road 5-10 minutes after that. So it's right on the edge of what I suppose they call the New England there.
Yeah.
Fallow deer, and there's no doubt there's pigs there. Haven't seen them. And there is some talk of reds there too. I haven't seen those, but certainly seen fallow deer.
Okay. Well, tonight we're going to talk about what has been my favourite state forest hunt down in New South Wales, and you'll be going straight past it on the way to the Upper Hunter. A lot of people will head from Tamworth and hang a left just before you get into Tamworth City and up into the hills on the eastern side to a place called Nundell. A lot of people that are focused on state forest hunting will have heard of Nundell for good or for bad. There's lots of discussion about whether it's a great park or a bad park or an overshot park or what have you park, but certainly it's one that I've spent a lot of time in, and over the last couple of years would have been there 5, 6, 7 times easily with various different members of our club. So it's a great park, and one that I'm keen to dive into with you and just have a good chat about how we've hunted it and where we've stayed and some of the features around that.
Yeah, look, that whole Nundle system, and it does encompass a number of state forests, but generally you just refer to it as Nundle. I've hunted there, I think, 4 years in a row. I haven't hunted there for a while though, but I have had some great success there on both deer and pig, and both buck and doe, so both meat animals, and got a good buck out of there, and certainly got a couple of good pigs out of there as well. It's one of those forests. I'm the same. It's because it's so different to hunting in Queensland. It's actually quite an interesting place. Heavy pine, a lot of still old growth pine, different climate altogether. It can get damn cold up there. Actually, one year it wasn't snowing, but it was close. It was sleety.
Oh, it's snowed there plenty of times.
Yeah, I just haven't been there, but I thought, we're not far off from this turning into snow, so it's a real different experience. And I know, like all state forests, it's got the stories of it's got nothing in there, but I've never not seen an animal taken out of Nundell, and I've never not myself taken an animal out of Nundle system. So I think it's a producer. I think it's a great producer, in fact.
I think it's a great bit of land. Like you say, Hanging Rock borders Nundell, borders Tuggerlo, borders Terrible Billy, and other parks further east as well. Newindock, I think. I will have pronounced that incorrectly.
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah.
But it's out there as well, and it's a very large piece of land. Not as large as the other park we spoke about, the Pilliga.
No, it's not classed as Pilliga, but I still think the forest
feels big. It feels every bit as big in my view, because you can drive through so much of it, and it's mountainous country. You can be driving along the forest way, and you can be looking down into huge gullies below and up the other side and over the other side, and that's all still part of the park. It doesn't have the same land mass as the Pelican, there's no doubt about that, but it feels huge because of the size of some of the hills and mountains in that system. So yeah, it's great. It's very exciting. And like you say, it gets cold. If you're planning your trip and looking at weather forecasting, Nundell's the township at the bottom of the hill. So you need to scrub 4 or 5 degrees off their temperature on the forecast easily. We often reference Hanging Rocks weather forecast instead. And it has its own system. It's almost like the Victorian high country in some respects, that you can get those 4 seasons quite easily through the day, from howling wind to warm sunshine to blistering cold quite easily. So it fascinates me. Like I said, it's got huge, big plantations that have been there for a long time, but also large stands of native eucalypt and gullies and creeks and rivers and things like that. So it's got a real place for me.
Okay, so if we were to hunt Nundell, and just before we were talking about even the different approaches in terms of the roads, how to get there. So if we're going to hunt Nundell, or if I'm a new hunter and I'm going to hunt Nundell in the first instance. So if I'm leaving from Queensland and let's say Brisbane, what we're basically doing is we're heading down the New England Highway. So that's where we're going. For me, I've always turned off just before you get to Tamworth. I think it's called Moonby. I think that's a little place that you turn off. You turn off to the east and you go up into the hill country, and I think you go past a reservoir, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
and
there's a dam there. Yep,
that's right. You get to Nundell. You were saying that you come in a different way. So which way have you approached Nundell?
Yes, I used to go the same way. The first time I went down to Nundell was with an 88 Queensland organised hunt. So it was all of our branches up in Queensland would go down there for the rut, and we joined up as a group down there. And the tag along for that trip went exactly the way that you've described, in from near Tamworth there. But as I've travelled there more often, I've found that you can shave close to an hour off that trip by turning left at Urella, outside of Armidale, and you follow that to Walker. And Walker's a beautiful town on that, what's the road called? The Thunderbolt Highway.
Yeah, the Thunderbolt Way.
Heads down, Thunderbolt Way, heads down to down off the New England towards the coast. But before you head down there, you get to Walker. And Walker was the best spot for me because they've got a fantastic coffee shop, bakery in the middle of town. They've got all the amenities that you might need from a bottle shop, those sorts of things if you're lacking. But also they've got a BP there, and that was important to me because I had a BP fuel card, so I was always looking for BPs everywhere. But the BP has an after-hours payment system. It's a little tiny, one of these old NRMA sort of fairly unbranded, dinky little servo, but they've got a BP pay station. You can swipe your credit card in the middle of the night if that's where you are after the Friday at work, heading down there. You can fuel up. You can fill your tanks of water up and things like that, and then carry on straight through Walker for about 40 kilometres. You'll get to a sign that says "Turn right to Nundell." Turn right, go for 10 kilometres, and that will take you to Forest Way. From Forest Way, you're literally 40 odd kilometres from where we stay, and where I recommend anyone stays as a new person to the park, and that is Ponderosa.
That's right.
Ponderosa. Yep. And funnily enough, I always thought that Ponderosa was named because of the ponds in the park. Like, this is just, there's a big pond here, we'll call this Ponderosa, because there's a beautiful big pond. Ducks land on it, and there's plenty of water in it, and there's little creek systems and what have you. What I didn't know, as the uneducated Kiwi living here over in Australia, is the Ponderosa Pines. It was actually the site of the old milling sawmill, Ponderosa, and there's a reference to that on a memorial sign somewhere near Ponderosa campground. But it's a great campground. It's got a long drop toilets, which are, I'm not going to say they're clean, but they're as clean as you could expect they would be. They're pretty well maintained. You can draw water out of the creek for showers if you want to do that, and it's open campground. It's nestled amongst You haven't been back there for a little while, so they've cleared a lot of ponderosa. A lot of the dead pines have been cleared out, so it's quite open now. They still have some very big pines standing above it, so it's still a picture. But they've done a bit of work in ponderosa itself, putting up new fences and signs and bits and pieces, and they've made it quite a pretty little park. But there's room there for probably, I don't know, 20 different camping groups in that area. It would cover maybe 10 acres of land.
Oh, wow.
5 to 10 acres. By the time you get into all the little spots around the Ponderosa Park itself, it's a reasonable little plot, and it's a no hunting zone smack bang in the middle of the border area, which is Nundell and Hanging Rock itself. So you can hunt straight out of Ponderosa if you want on foot. There's been deer come into camp in the years that we've been there in the middle of the night. There've been deer just through the trees. You could basically smell them, touch them. They were that close, rutting away. So it's right in the middle of the park, and it's a really great spot.
Yeah, look, I was going to say that is the pick of the places to stay there, simply because it's so well located. There is other places you camp there. It's a big chunk of ground. You can find lots of places to camp, but the Ponderosa, as it's commonly known, is a great place to camp. As you said, you're going in through Uralla and Walker. One of the things that used to be in Uralla, which is now gone, was a really good hunting shop, Hunter's Haven. Right. They sold really good quality gear, and they sold winter gear. So I used to that's where I would buy all my winter gear. I'd go down and once a year I'd buy up. The other thing is there's a pie shop still in Uralla called the Pie Mechanic, which is one of the best pie shops in the country.
Right, I'm writing that down on the notebook.
I
don't mind a decent pie shop.
Right there. So yeah, Uralla's a lovely little town. So we get to Nundell. There's a couple of approaches, and recommendation is stay at the Ponderosa. The other reason is that the Ponderosa is probably only 15-minute drive from the Township of Nundell as well.
Yeah,
maybe about 15 minutes. Yeah. So because Ian's route kind of goes from north to south. The Ponderosa is, and that's not exactly cardinal bearings, but the Ponderosa is at the bottom part or the southern part of the forest, and not too far from there is the Township of Nundell, which in itself is quite a nice little township. There's a caravan park there, and it's one of those, like a lot of those New England little small towns, they seem to kind of punch above their weight for what you can get in a small town in that area. So there's also, and of course, if you needed to go to Tamworth's about an hour from that location. That's probably the closest major town from anywhere around there. So the Ponderosa puts you right at the start of your hunting blocks. So if I'm down there, and we spoke about the weather, what do you think I need to take?
Oh, look, it depends, right? Every time I go there, it's cold. Even in the early spring and even late spring, heading towards summer, I've been there and it's been quite cool at night time. So you need a pack for that. The clouds come over there, you're in the clouds. They don't tend to be above you. You tend to be in them, very foggy, misty, so you can end up wet just by walking along the road because you end up in these really moist clouds. So you need to be prepared for all conditions going into that location. We would hunt there more often in the autumn months because that's the peak of the rut. As you said, I actually were talking about earlier before about your hunt next week, but this location has red deer, and it has fallow deer, and it has pigs, and it has goats, and there's been a hybrid elk / wapiti red in there that's been let off a back end off of one of the farms off the back of near Togolo. That we'll talk a bit more about. Another superstition potentially. By the look on your face, I've seen the animal. I've seen a photo of a very elk-looking animal coming out of there, and there are others can attest to that as well. But I guess I bring that up because early autumn is the red deer, followed by the fallow rut. So you've got an extended period of time there, and it is cold up there at that time of year. We have photos of some of the state hunts that we've had up there with the ADA, and they've been in the snow at that time. And if you weren't prepared for it, then you're going to have a miserable time. And it's bone-chilling cold. When the wind comes up a little bit, it could be quite cool. It's damp underfoot quite often. It is muddy, gets your truck bogged, very difficult to access. The only time I've ever come a cropper in a national park is in Nundell, and I was going uphill in a four-wheel drive, and I had a little bit of momentum. I was going uphill, and the road just slipped underneath my wheels, and I went straight off the bank, down the side. In an uphill, my brakes wouldn't stop. Nothing could stop me. It was that damp and slippery, and off I went in my fairly new vehicle. Didn't do any damage, which was fine, but I had a reasonable walk out to the road to try and flag down someone who looked like a hunter, that had an overdressed four-wheel drive with a winch and everything else on it, to come up there and help me. And this fella that stopped, he had the knobbliest tires you've ever seen on a vehicle. He was the right car to help me, and he struggled to get up to where I was too. So you've just got to be careful the gear that you take, and we can get more into gear, but I guess my message to answer your question is prepare for wet, prepare for cold, prepare for the whole lot.
And it's that red soil too, which is, diabolical when it gets wet. So I myself had a situation going downhill where we went, oh, look, we're not really steering at the moment.
Oh, no. I know.
Let's just ride this out and hope. And then I thought, well, if we ride this out, we get to the bottom, then we're going to figure out how to get back out. And
exactly.
we did. But
exactly.
it's certainly, because it's all, well, I don't know if it's always, but it does, certainly my experience is I've never been there when it's dry. I mean, I've been there when it's maybe not raining, but it's not dry. It's it's got that real wintry feel to it. Everything just is wet all the time. So, open fires.
Very English feel to it, Mark.
That's right. Open fires. Want to take a couple of pairs of boots. You want to be able to take gear that you could kind of rest and recycle whilst you're out there, because you obviously want to spend a lot of time hunting. Gaiters are very, very handy there, simply because they try and keep a bit of water off your boots and off your legs. But it is like that. And where we are going, it's the same, and especially after a good rain, when the grass is up, everything is just wet. So as you go through, you get wet. And I've found for places like Nundell, the Kiwi bush shirts are kind of designed for that country.
The one behind you?
No, that's a short one. The long one, really long ones. Yeah, that's a Ranger. That's the short one, which is longish, but those ones that almost go down near your knees type thing, the bush shirt, they come in real handy in that, because you just got something that's almost like a smock. You're covered, and so when you get back to camp, you can take it off and dry it out. I've got a Stony Creek one, and I'm pretty sure there's a few photos of me wearing that with animals. So that's really
as far as the anorak that comes down to my knees is what gets brought out in those conditions. I've not worn it anywhere as much as I have in Nundell.
Yeah.
But you're right, it can get wet.
So you're going to get down there. So you're whilst there is some water available, obviously, because it's wet, you want to be careful about drinking water. So you want to really, again, be self-sufficient. For two reasons. One, spend as much time as hunting as you can, and two, because there's no real amenities. So you want to be self-sufficient. So you want to have plenty of fuel, plenty of water, and also it doesn't hurt maybe to, on the way down, especially in the cooler months, you go past the petrol station and they're selling a bag of firewood. It doesn't hurt to grab one of those. That's what I usually do, grab a bag. So when I get there, I've got dry wood to start with. I can start hunting that stuff as we go, but make sure you've got some dry wood with you when you arrive. So you're going to really want to prepare for a colder winter setup.
So, this is where, the tents and your camper vans, and if you're swagging it, something over your swag to keep the water off the swag. So that's the kind of environment you're going to find yourself in. So, be prepared, have your gear. Don't rely on the fact that you can nip in and out of town. I mean, you can if you want, but that's probably not what you want to aim for. You've got a nice campground. As I said, I haven't been there for a while, but it was very nice when I was there. But you really want to have your gear ready for that campground. So that's kind of how to get there and what I should take, and also considering the weather options. So, as a Queenslander, you're going to be thermally challenged there. So what's the expectation then when I'm on the ground hunting?
What are we going to see? Or are you still thinking about clothing?
What would be well, I've got my gear. I think I'm warm. I've got I've got my camp set up. I'm here. What kind of hunting am I going to experience in Nundell, and what kind of game am I going to see in Nundell, or in the Nundle system?
You've got an enormous range of options, which is great. So we'll call it the Nundle system. Hanging Rock, Nundell, all of those are part of that. They're all joined. They just have a border, right? So there is a huge range. If you're into long distance shooting, then there's long distance options, because this is a park that is built, or not built, but is bordered around forestry. So quite often you'll get there, and what was there last year is completely different this year, because they've felled hundreds of acres of pines for timber, and that timber's gone, and now they've got little seedlings on, and they've got fresh growth coming up, and you'll have some 500, 600, 700 meter distances where deer are coming out of the bush of the late afternoon and onto that fresh pick. So you can find yourself a nice vantage point, and you can be looking out over that. Moving out of that cleared land, you then find that the smaller saplings, or not saplings, but call them about 1 meter high. We found the fallow just love to get in there and build scrapes in and around that. They can still see above it. They can still look out over their valley. They're more hidden, but you can get in there and you can find scrapes, and you can mark scrapes and build yourself a pattern, log it in your journal, figure out what's going on, and go back there day in, day out. And we've had quite a bit of success marking scrapes on GPSs, coming back to a group and getting one person to go and sit over that scrape, and they'll come back with that buck. So that's the next layer, and that's sort of all in the pines. Then you've got the really big pines, or from the meter all the way up to the really big pines. I've always found that the red deer like the pines.
Okay.
And I've always found that the fallow like the eucalypt. They like the native, and the red deer like the pines. Maybe that's because the motherland of where the red deer came from had a lot more pine forest than Australian eucalypt, no doubt. But whether that's in their genetic or not, I don't know. But that's just what I've noticed. If you're targeting a species, then you'll find, I have always found the reds in the pine areas. So you'll get into these big mature pine areas, and they're huge plantations that you can walk in, and you're dwarfed, and it's dark, and it's covered in needles, and they've got lots of deadfall running down the center, pig rootings everywhere, and you can just, every step you can see a big stag would stand up in front of you and say, oh, I'm there, and you've got to be ready for it. So you've got that opportunity as well. Moving out of that and into the eucalypt, I've always found that that's where the fallow are. And the fallow like to find their way into big, deep, dark gullies where the creek systems are running through. You find that the bucks hang out down there, and the girls come to them. And if you can get into the deepest, darkest stuff that's away from a lot of the roads, then you're now in close quarter country hunting. You're within the 50 to 100 meter range, if that, and you're basically bush stalking. So there's a big range of stuff there. And then you can get right up onto the tops of this. It's still all planted. It's still all trees. You're not finding a lot of clearing up on the tops. Again, it's bush stalking, but you're just finding different groups and different habitat quite easily. Now, that's just the deer. You'll find goats in a section, and then you'll find the pigs are just in and out of the blackberry all day. You can be walking down little tracks in some of the pine plantations, and there's just pigs running back and forwards across those tracks quite frequently. So it's a bit of something for everybody. Depends what you like to do, and you can target that specifically.
Look, I'd never really thought about that way, but I agree with you with when you were saying about the reds and the fallow, I was just thinking about all the fallow deer I shot. I've shot them in the natural, on that free country where there's still native growth next to pines. They've been in that native growth. All the pigs I've shot have all been in the pine.
That's right. That's what I find.
The pine. In the pine, there is a very bright red mushroom that grows, and the
With white
pigs
spots.
love that stuff.
Yep.
They seem to love it. When you hit a patch of it, you'll just. First time I actually saw it, I was wondering what all these little red things were, and I realised it was these mushrooms. The pigs had just gone through and bulldozed whole areas. And it was one of the biggest diggings I'd ever seen and it was so big. We didn't really it took us a while to navigate which way they've came and which way where they come from and where they've been heading, because it was just this huge chewed up ground underneath the pine. So, and you're right, it's dark in those pines.
It's really dark, like it's eerily dark.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much airflow. It's quiet because you're walking on how many years of needles, so the ground's spongy. Though when there's a weather in there, it can be quite still in there. There's a true insulative property of those pines. So that's really different. I mean, to me, I always find that a really different experience about Nundell, and a really something to look forward to, getting in amongst those pines, because it's just different. It's a different type of hunting. So and as I said, I've never taken a red there, but I know people have taken a red there, and I'm thinking about where they're taking the red, and I'm going, yep, they're in the pine. That's right.
I have seen fallow through the pines, but I've always found that they're going through it, and I have a suspicion that they probably bed in the pines because there's that extra layer of insulation. It seems to be warmer in the pines than anywhere else, and I'd say they tend to get out of the pines during the day, and then they feed off where the eucalyptus and the grassy tussock stuff that naturally grows up underneath the eucalypt. And they prefer that over. I mean, there's not a lot of pick under the pines, but the last time I was in there were areas where some green flush was coming through, and I'm just not sure. I'm not scientific enough to get into what they do and they don't like, but that's my observation. I've written that stuff down in my little book, and you can go back to it year after year and see where I've seen things, and that's my little mind map.
So, have you taken a red there?
I haven't. No, I've carried one out for somebody. I've seen them in there, but no, I haven't shot a red in there. I'm almost always targeting fallow.
Yeah, I haven't seen a red in there. As I said, I've taken pigs and fallow deer in there. So let's kind of talk a couple of successful hunts. So a successful fallow hunt for you. What's one of the breakdown of a successful fallow hunt for you?
Well, I had a story. I actually wrote this one and went into a magazine, and it was my buck fever hunt. And this was the first buck I really ever even targeted. I was always focused on hunting for meat. And even though I was heading down to these parts in the rut, that was the camaraderie of camp, and all of that stuff that I really enjoyed happened to be around the rut. But I was always focused on the meat. But there's a particular part of Hanging Rock that I really like to go to, and I'd mapped it out the year before, and I felt that it was just perfect for deer, and I got some beautiful photos of this area. But I was there for a week, and I targeted this specific ridgeline, and it went down to a gully on either side. But I targeted this specific ridgeline because I'd heard bucks croaking there on my last day last time. So I thought, wow, that's an amazing noise that fallow bucks will make. Right, that croaking sound that they make just haunted me for a year until I got back there. And I just worked the wind and made sure I was on the right side of this ridge line. It wasn't a high ridge line, but it was obviously one that was holding. There was plenty of sign around, plenty of browse around. You could see that things had been browsed off, and there were no cattle in there, and it certainly wasn't littered with pig signs. So it was a fair assumption that there were deer going through there. And I made my way to the end of this ridgeline where I knew there's this beautiful big clearing. Down the center of the clearing, there was a tree line, but it was would have been about a 10-acre clearing, quite long, and then across about 100 meters or so. And I scoped that out, and I sort of mind mapped what I was going to do for the rest of the week. Went back into camp that afternoon, pretty pleased with what I'd found in terms of sign and where I thought things were going to be. But that night we were talking in camp about the use of electronic devices or callers in state parks. It was a conversation that just happened around the camp, and there was a fella there that wasn't part of our group, but he's like, yeah, I use them all the time. I thought, isn't this illegal? You know, there's some discussion, and we'll talk about the legalities of this in another session we have, hopefully with someone from the GLU. But there's an ongoing debate around using electronic things to enhance your ability, and game callers has always been on the no-no list, right? But there's some, there's some people that would contest that. But anyway, the conversation around the campfire was all about this game caller, and I said, look, this is, it's not on to use game callers in state forests. He said, oh, no one's going to catch me. Whatever. Okay, that's fine. Where are you hunting? Showed me on the map, and I said, okay, well, that's reasonably close to where I'm going to be hunting. Not dangerously close, but almost encroaching from a different angle to where I'm going to be. Back in my mind, went to bed, got up in the early hours of the morning so that I was at ground zero in the dark and heading into the direction where I thought I was going to find deer still feeding out. And as the light's coming up, and I've picked the wind well, and I'm walking along this ridge line, this buck starts croaking. But it was so ridiculous. It was so loud, and it was so consistent, and it was just non-stop. And it would have been a solid 20 minutes, crow, crow, crow. And it was just, and I'm like, man, this guy is at the bottom of my little gully, at the back of where I want to go. And he's got, it sounded like he had this thing plugged into an amp. He had to have had a generator down there. It was ridiculous how loud it was. Anyway, I was pretty pissed that this was going on in the area that I dreamed about for a year. So I stomped my way to the end of the ridge line where I could overlook the gully, put all my blaze on, put something on my rifle, slung it up over my back so that it was waving around so he could hear me coming, and he wasn't going to stick his gun in my direction. And I crested the ridge, and there was this big buck servicing 5 or 6 does. And it was him. It wasn't this guy down in the gully whatsoever. It was flat out this horny buck, going nuts. And he was so loud. And it's the first time I've ever heard and been close to a buck in the wild. And I was just awestruck, absolutely awestruck. So I did what every fairly new hunter who'd not really been in that situation before. This deer was 50 meters away, just down the bottom there. I raised my rifle and I shot him, and he went down in a screaming heap right in front of my eyes, fell into the bracken. And I cycled my bolt as I always do, put another round through, and I followed the hinds of the does as they ran off. And I thought, I'll take a meat deer as well. I can be greedy here because they don't know where I am. I thought, no. I'm going to cherish this moment. This is the first state forest buck that I've taken of any real caliber, so I'm going to look after it. And I went back to the spot where he was, and he was gone.
Oh,
and
I can do that sometimes.
I couldn't believe it. He was just gone. And I thought, no, that can't be right. So I wandered down to where he was, and in my mind's eye, I could see his antler thrashing on the ground. I could see it, like perfect. And I went down to the area, and he just wasn't there. The far out. And I looked for an hour and a half, back and forwards, looked back up to where I shot, found the brass on the tree, got the picture. Yep, I'm in the right spot. He's just not there. And I couldn't understand it. And I was really annoyed. So I kicked dirt and rocks and shit all the way back to camp. I was so annoyed. That afternoon, I went back for another look. And sadly, along my way to go back for another look, some silly doe put her head up, and she ended up in my backpack and on the way back to the car. And that didn't even make me feel good because I was still so annoyed about this buck. got back to camp and went and got a couple of my mates, and we went back there the next day to have another look, because I was still quite certain, but in my mind's eye, the picture in my brain at that point, that thrashing antler turned into waving bracken fern, right? It was no longer what I thought it was. I started to doubt myself, and we couldn't find it. But as we were walking along that ridge line, croak, 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 there he was again. And he was alive. And I thought, okay, now I've got 5 more days to target this guy, because I was there for quite some time. So I spent the next little while trying to target this deer over the next few days, and back every day. And I knew where he was going, and the wind would change slightly. And I changed my tacks, and eventually I was narrowing it down. And it got to the very last day, and I still hadn't taken this guy. And my good hunting friend Trevor, he said, right, we're going to go and we're going to get this buck. We're going to attack it from 2 different angles, and we're going to get him. I said, okay, let's do it. We walked to the end of that area again where I first thought I had shot him, and we just sat down for a minute, and we were just listening and seeing what was going on. And it's amazing when you immerse yourself a little bit and just take a breath that nature sort of told us what was going on. Trevor is the biggest pig hunter I've ever met. He would sacrifice anything hunting-wise for a decent boar. Wow, this monster of a boar walked out right in front of us. And it's the biggest pig I've seen in my life. One of those typical chiseled mountain boars, huge big fronts and, smaller back ends and, big ivory sticking out. And he's, looking to raise his rifle to shoot this pig. And I said, no, mate. I said, we're chasing that buck today. You're leaving that pig alone. We're not ruining this buck for that pig. 2 or 3 minutes later, there's a murder of crows, so they call them.
Yes, correct.
Just over there in the trees. And Trev's looked at me, and I've looked at Trev, and we said, you know what, my buck's over there. That pig's probably eating the back end out of that, and there's a mob of crows on there. And 25 meters from where I thought he was? No word of a lie. We walked down there as a ray of sunlight shone out of the clouds and onto the curled up antler of my buck, still lying there, 5 days old and maggoty and disgusting. But I got him, and it was the same one that I had missed this entire time. So it was a good way for me to learn how to hunt these animals and just stick at, if you take the time to target a specific gully and get to know the gully and understand the creeks and where the wind currents are going and all of those things over a period of time, you can be really successful, and you can get to know a lot of the animals that are working in that area and target something specifically. And it's the first time I'd done that. So that was a great experience for me. In hindsight, going back to where I took the shot, I took an offhand shot at a buck, at a stag, and I should never have done that. Directly to my right, there was a tree with a nice little branch sticking out I could have just leaned on. Just here next to me was a stump that I could have sat down behind and leaned on, and then there was a log lying on the ground. I had everything in my favour for that animal, and luckily I got him. But I don't condone offhand shooting in those sorts of situations whatsoever. If you can just take a chill pill for a second and have a look around and, get to know what you can use to help you, then you're gonna make a better go at it. But that was my buck fever story, and there's plenty of those that come out of Nundell and Hanging Rock. There's some really great animals in there.
Yeah. So I mean, that pig would be dead. So you.
Oh, well,
you wouldn't even had the opportunity to say we're gonna bang, would have just dropped it straight there. Then we would.
Trev's a good fella, and I tell you what,
we may have discussed that we weren't pig shooting. I would have dropped it. So that was it for me.
Yeah. Well, we as soon as I found that buck on the ground, I turned around to Trev to give him a high five, and he was gone. He was after the pig. He didn't care about what was going on with the maggoty deer on the ground. But it was a good story, great memory.
So my buck was, so I got, he was in a, so we were hunting one of those natural, so native timber gullies. So we were heading down this gully. So we were following the track, contouring it down. It's very early in the morning, dawn type thing. We were going down, and as you said, right down in the gully, there was 2 croaking bucks. They were, we could hear them. But the wind was all wrong. To go down to pursue them would have been, a false economy. We would have just pushed them off. So we were sitting there listening to these 2 back and forth. And that you're right, that croaking sound is a really quite interesting sound. It's funny how deer kind of make sound that don't align with deer. The sound that comes out of them doesn't. I mean, for me, a bugling elk is even stranger. An animal that size makes a sound that sounds like that. So we were hearing that, that croaky broke type of rolling sound that they make. And then, if you will, if that was in front of us, we could hear that. From behind, I started to hear another one, and I went, "Oh, hang on, there's one behind. There's three here. We're in the middle of them." He was behind, and the track contoured down into the gully, but the gully itself was a cross section. So the two bucks were much below us, and this one was above us, and the wind was it was right. It was a very good situation. So I said, "Well, I'm going after him." So the first thing I had to do was crawl under some blackberry, because it was basically the bottom of this quite steep hill was bordered by blackberry. Decided to crawl under it rather than try and climb over it. So literally got on the ground and found a little lowest point and crawled through it, and then started to make my way up this very, very steep hill, natural, a native timber hill. And just as I was getting close to the top, there was a hell of a noise, a lot of crashing, and I thought, what's this? And I thought, the deer moved, and it was a wombat. It was a wombat, and what it was, it was this massive eucalypt that had fallen over, and he was living inside this. And I was making my way to this eucalypt as cover. I thought that'd be great cover. And I disturbed him, and he came out, and I was a bit, oh my God, I'm blown here. But then I realised he was the perfect cover. So as he went crashing off, I started moving while he was moving, I was moving, because he was perfect cover. For whatever reason, that the sound of a crashing wombat did not affect the deer at all. This guy continued to croak, and finally I got over the lip behind this big eucalypt and actually looked into where they were. And again, native timber and a bit of a clearing, and it was full of deer. Does everywhere. And all of a sudden, out he comes, just croaking, doing that, head bobbing, croaking, throwing the sound up in the air as they do, that wave action as he just came out. And he was not 50 meters away. He was that close. And but what was behind him was some really heavy cover, and I kind of got a little nervous and thought, if I heart lung him, he could very well go for 100 meters before he drops, and I'll lose him. So I thought, I'm going to have to shoulder shoot him. So it was one of those situations where I really had the chance and the time to think about what I was doing, because none of them knew I was there. The wind was perfect. I was just observing them behind this cover, and away they went. And he was doing that kind of back and forth action. He'd come out and he'd turn around and he'd come out. And the first time he turned around and went back in, I thought, oh, is he spotted me? No, he's just doing this lap. And as he came out again, I just put it up on his shoulder and bang, and shouldered him. And it was, it's great when you actually do that shot that you want to do. And he just nosedive, went boom, down in the ground. And then the rear end just followed later, and bang, and then he rolled over. And strange enough, the grass was not that particularly high, but when he rolled, the antlers disappeared. And even then I thought, oh no, I even thought, what's happening?
Isn't that amazing?
I can't see him. It's weird. And I often think about that. I know exactly what happened, but I lost sight of him, and I went, came out of the grass, and there he was. And for me, it was that kind of. It was a really interesting hunt in a way that one of those ones where all the pieces just fit together. So, you describe it, it sounded like, it was a 10-minute walk up. It wasn't, but the way it all worked, it worked, and bang. And so I had and the day before I'd taken a doe the day before. So I had my buck within that weekend. I had a doe and a buck, and the only thing went wrong was when I was gutting him. I nicked the bag, and I got a bit of gut on my boots.
The juice.
That was about the only thing that went wrong. So yeah, and he's down in the entryway to our house. He's down on the wall down there.
Oh, nice.
Nice little army buck. No monster,
Well,
but he's a great deal.
funnily enough, this one here is the buck from my buck fever story. This one.
Okay.
That one.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah,
So,
you see the out there.
Yeah, he was a good one, and I favour him. A good tip though, for those that are new to this. In my story, I talked about that second day going back to find him and hearing him croak again. Well, it clearly wasn't him; it was another one. And every time a buck that I know of has been taken out of this area, and it'll be the same for all fallow, no doubt. But the satellite buck that's hanging around there takes over that harem very, very quickly. Like if you shoot him in the morning, there'll be a new buck there taking his place in the afternoon. And that buck I've seen on more than one occasion is bigger than the one that we've taken. He might be younger, but in a lot of cases he's bigger. He's not fighting as much, and he's maybe using more of his energy for growing antler. We've seen some really good animals come in as number 2. So shoot the first one, and if you're greedy, go back for the second one in the afternoon or in the morning, or set your buddy up, because there's a very good chance that there's going to be another one right there.
Which I think reflects a couple of things. One is that it's the whole rut is a highly competitive situation. They are literally fighting each other for biological domination. That's what they're doing. They are literally at war with each other. Who's going to have the most days? So there's no love lost. So as soon as there's a vacancy, there's not going to be let's mourn Freddie. No, straight in.
Stuff you, Freddie.
That's right. And the second thing is, it also reflects the fact that that there is those animals in waiting. That's the I suppose density of what you get at Nundell. Nundell has a very, very strong deer population. Lots of stories about how it got established and so on. And some of those stories are quite interesting and quite humorous. But the reality is, there's lots of deer there. So if you're there in a rut, you're going to be in a really good chance to at least see, if not hear, if not see, if not take a buck. And if you miss out, go back. They're not changing their behaviour because of you so much that their behaviour is being governed, by their loins. So that's what's happening.
Yeah, and they won't move. You won't scare them off. Not even the girls. You won't scare them off. You might make them. You'll push them. Yeah, they might stay undercover for longer and come out more at night time. And you'll find that at the moment. Yes, it's heavy. It's always had a lot of game. It receives probably more pressure now than ever. So the animals are getting more used to people coming in there. But that park is used by a lot more than hunters. So they're used to vehicles. They're used to motorbikes. They're used to fossickers. They're used to forestry people. The car doesn't necessarily scare them, but when they hear gunshots, I think you'll find that they will go, recede back into the bushline a little bit quicker than normal. In my last few trips there, I can't say, I can definitely say that every time I've been there, I've seen deer, but I can't say any longer that I've taken deer every time I've gone there. The last 2 years have been the hardest hunting in that park that I've ever seen, but that was largely to do with the same things we spoke about with Severn and others. It had a big the drought had a big impact on that area, and the pressure had a lot of impact in it. And I also feel like COVID had a big impact on it, in that we were all locked down for so long. When we were allowed out, we all went out. And instead of some numbers going into that park frequently, that place was booked solid for months and months and months once we were allowed back out after COVID, because it just happened to be just before, I think, the rut period. So it got a lot of pressure, and then sadly got absolutely wasted by wildfire.
Yeah.
So you put those three things together, and you're going to impact the herd. They're going to move, they're going to change, and that's exactly what has happened. Now, like I said, I've always seen the deer there, and even when I say there weren't many around last time I went, I saw 50, which is still a lot. But they were just after dark outside a shooting light, or they were just in the neighbour's property. So I know they were coming into the park, but I was seeing, a herd of them on the neighbour's farmland. They were definitely around. There's no doubt. I left after one trip, and one of our branch members went back, hunted a strategy that we've always had, and he bagged a couple of animals, him and a friend. So that was fine. And I know plenty of people are still taking them, but for me it takes time. And Nundle, I don't know, it's different to some of the parks that I go to. It demands the respect of a bit of time to get to know some of the systems. It's not just a flat piece of land. You get to know a gully system, you get to know the forest, you get to know how to get in and out of it without the wind being a problem. And the more you sort of get to know your bit of ground, then the more successful you'll be, I've always found.
Well, that kind of leads into my pig story there, because in a way, what happened was it was Tim and I, and it was our first branch hunt to Nundell. So the first time we ever went. And at the time, neither of us had a four-wheel drive. And Tim said, I'm going to drive, and he had literally a Mitsubishi Lancer. So we drove down, all our gear, but we had all our camping gear. We just didn't have four-wheel drives at the time. Went down, set up, and we were the only one in the because it was a state hunt, and I think it was like 20 people there. We were the only one who didn't have a four-wheel drive. So
look at these guys.
That's right. We literally drove out of camp and turned north on Nundell Forest Way. Drove a kilometre up until we saw the first track. Kind of again, we went right. There's another track going to the right, and at the time, I think what it was, if I remember, the road's actually a border, and one side we couldn't hunt at the time, so we were on the Ponderosa side of Nundell Forest Way. Drove up, and literally Mitsubishi Lancer, we said, okay, you can pull over there on the grass, and that's as far as we can go. So got off the track, out of the way of any traffic, and pulled over on the grass, got out. Started to walk through some native timber, immediately pushed some roos up or wallabies up, got into those, and then got to the pine. And so, went from relatively open native timber to pine country. First time ever been in pine country. Went, wow, this is completely different. This is weird, timber in rows, and those rows are, there's some of the trees still have got some marking, and they've been marked a long time. These are heavy growth pines. So we walked in, and we were just walking through, and we were keeping an eye on each other, walking down the road, just rows going, both of us kind of, this is really different. This is very, very different.
And I bet you felt like something was going to pop up at any second.
We just thought, you just don't, it was like, this is live, but you just, but your vision is actually quite limited, because, you've got all these rows. So we hit, that's where I first saw all that red. I went, okay, what's this? And I went, okay, it's mushrooms, something's, and then we hit these pig diggings, and we were just going, holy moly, And what it was it had been a deadfall, so a tree had gone over, and it created a bit of a clearing, and that's what had grown up through the clearing. And so we were kind of spent some time trying to figure the angle of, how do they, which way do they come from, which way do they go? Couldn't do it, so we kept moving the way we were going, which was kind of into the wind, but it was very, very, very light breeze. And we hit a track. We were walking through the pine, and literally a track appeared, and there was about a 5-foot drop down to the track. And so we dropped down to the track, and when we turned around, we could see where the pigs had gone. We could see, okay, this is the way they'd gone. You could see that they'd kicked that way. In front of us was a very small fern gully, very small fern gully, and then more pines. So down through the fern gully and started walking up through the pines. So, we'd travel maybe 400, 500 meters at the most, walking up back into the pines, and there they were. The pigs were just there in the pines. And I just dropped two of them, like, just like that, bang bang. And the big one got that problem where, saw the first pig, saw the animal shot it. The third one burst from cover, and it was big. And went, okay, missed that one. And so we got those two pigs, took some meat off them, drove back to camp, and realised how literally close we were to camp as crow flies, because there was guys in camp go, well, we heard you shooting. And I said, yeah, we shot some pigs. And they said, you sound like, yeah, we weren't that far away. So we then spent the next part of that week in that area, and we saw deer there. Never saw any more pigs there, but saw, first fallow buck, saw him there, saw lots of does, took a doe. I didn't take a doe, sorry, Tim took a doe. We spent our whole time just exploring that very small area, or that patch. And what we found is it ran down into this open country where it opened up. That's where the deer were on the transition. There's other vehicle tracks that we didn't know about that we crossed over. We couldn't travel those vehicle tracks in the vehicle we were, but we kind of started to see, okay, this is a grid pattern. And as you said, learnt that area. And when we left, there was a guy there who wasn't doing particularly well. He was hunting by himself, so we said, hunt one of the last 3 or 4 days. He said, you can hunt with us in the afternoon. Here we took out, we did lots of exploring. But when we left, we said, look, go here, go down there. And he didn't get it, but he got on a chance of a deer down there. And I said, yeah, they're just there. And so it's about learning that kind of that space, that patch, and just exploring it. And it's big enough to do that. It's big enough to kind of go, I'm just going to focus here and see what I want. I mean, and when we were there, what we did in the end was that we would every morning go to this area and work this area. And in the afternoon, that's when we would go exploring. That's right. And I wanted to explore. We hit a mob of pigs. Oh, and in the car, that literally they burst out in front of us. Mob of pigs. The guys jumped out and went after them. Saw deer again on the move. But we'd go to this one area every morning and just work it. And invariably you'd catch a sign of a deer or you'd see something. So working in that area, finding a little patch that you want to help explore is a really good idea.
Yeah, what an amazing place, though. But you can talk to anyone that's been there. I mean, I've been there for a number of times over a number of years now, and certainly not as much as others that I know. But I've pulled out 20 animals, more. I've left pigs because I don't eat the pigs. I've shot pigs in there, not that I make a habit of it. But I've got loads of stories about the animals, and you'll have the spot that you're used to going to. And I've got the spot I'm used to going to, and my other friends have got their little spots. It seems to me that the place has got game all through it. And it really, I've said it and you've said it, and I'll say it again, you find a patch that looks and feels good, that has got, cover and some sort of creek system, and it's got various different types of foliage from the native to the pine, and just work it. Just work that bit of ground, and you're going to find animals. I've never found people not find animals in these parks. So I don't think there's a magic formula, although more often now I'm saying, due to the pressure and the fact that the herds spread out a bit because of the fires and what's happened in there, the animals that we're seeing are further from the roads. And that sounds like basic 101 stuff, that animals aren't going to be by the roads, but they are. You'll drive down Forest Way and you'll see them hop across in front of you, and you'll see them from the car. So they're definitely in and around those areas. But we've certainly found in recent times that the more uncomfortable you're going to get by getting away from the track and away from the car and exerting the effort and potentially staking out a fly camp and doing a bit further and things like that, the more successful you're going to be. And that's proven itself a few times over the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, look, when we hunted there, that's how we hunted. So the first couple of years, we didn't have an ability to go too far off track. So we literally pulled up and started walking. That's what we did. There was one morning, I'm sure there was a buck in a tree stand. He was in there. We just didn't get a chance to get him. We could hear him, but we just couldn't see him. But that's exactly what we did. We would just pull up and we would just start walking. And, you don't have to walk far. You don't have to walk kilometres and kilometres, but you do need to go into the scrub. So head into the scrub. And you find, game trails, you find natural clearings and things like that, and explore those. And then of course, you hit old vehicle tracks that that are no longer in use. And animals are like anyone else. If they can walk on a track, they'll walk on a track rather than push through scrub. So
you always find sign on the tracks.
That's right. It's because it's a matter of energy used for travel. It's easy to travel on a track. So finding those, finding like disused tracks in those areas of disused tracks is always really a really good a good chance of seeing game. In fact, I was thinking once we hunted in Pilliga and we came across a network of tracks that we didn't know how you would access these networks. We literally walked into the scrub and hit these tracks. And we don't know if it was by design or by situation, but a huge log or huge eucalypt had fallen over the track and was blocking the track. I don't know if they dropped it on purpose or what, because it was old, it cracked and it splintered, but it was obviously been there for a long time, and maybe that's what they did. Maybe they blocked it off for a fire reason or something like that. But on the other side of this log was some of the most heavily used goat sign I'd ever seen. The goats had just decided to turn this track into their own. They had this log to back up against, and they were just everywhere. And they weren't too. When we picked them up, they weren't too far from that log in the scrub again. But so animals they're opportunistic. So if you find old track systems, if you find motorbike tracks, remember I shot a pig. We were in Nundell. We were exploring. We were following a motorbike track, and it led to another area, and that's where we found the pig. So get out there and keep walking and keep moving, and you will see game in Nundell. There's no doubt about it. And the great thing about it, because it's so cold too, game prep becomes a little bit easier there.
Oh yeah.
It's a place where you can actually hang a deer outside overnight and not be too worried about it. Though
the quolls will get them.
Which is a fantastic thing that they are there, but they will. I've actually got a photo of one of the quolls, going trying to get on a hanging carcass. So having them outside, wrapping them in calico to keep any kind of bugs off them, perfect way to start the process of getting yourself some really high quality game meat. So that's
Absolutely.
one of the benefits of Nundell too. You can't do that everywhere else, but that's one place you can do it.
And Ponderosa, we tend to drop a water pump into the creek just off a battery, and that feeds a hot shower that we usually set up when we're there for a week, which is great, just a camping shower, but also allows you to pump water. And hanging the deer in the trees and then prepping them and then being able to clean up after yourself. It's really good to have a space in there. A lot of the trees have got hooks banged into them over the years where, you can hang them up there. It's quite interesting. I said before that the place is used by hunters and fossickers and motorbike riders and all sorts of enthusiasts. Horse people come in there, all sorts of people. So you've got to watch out a little bit of, when you're hunting in there. But we had a situation that we were there, and this year that we were hunting, saying that everyone seems to find deer. This was, 2 or 3 years ago before the fires. The group would go out, 30 hunters that were in camp. They'd all go off into their little ways, and then you'd eventually all start coming back to camp. Then you'd wait, and then another car would come in, and everyone would be looking to see, what was stacked up on the top of his ute or what was in the tray hanging off the back. And almost everybody at some point in time got a yoo-ha and a cheer from the crowd as they came in successful. It's absolutely awesome camaraderie around the camp. And most of the guys you don't know, but they're part of the organisation that we belong to. But this one particular day, we had 3 or 4 deer hanging in the trees around our camp. We had a big head mounted on the top of one of the camper trailers, as in front of the entrance. and these people came in their van, and they stopped for a chat. And they're like, "Oh, how long have you guys been here?" And like, "Oh, we've been here for a week," and all polite and all of those sorts of things. And they said, "Well, have you found anything?" And we all just looked at each other and went, "Isn't it obvious?" And they looked up, and they were fossicers, and they were looking for gems and what have you. Man, they couldn't get in their van fast enough and leave. I can tell you now. We weren't all dressed in cams. It was all in civvies and what have you. So it was pretty funny, but. Be respectful because everyone uses that space.
Yeah,
but,
it is. It is a multi. In fact, I remember one year the guy said there was mushroom.
Yeah. Pine mushroom fossicers.
Yep. Or what mushroom hunters or whatever it is, but they were in there, and it was a Polish group of people.
Yep.
And the guys, they wanted game meat. They actually said, "Hey, would you swap some mushrooms for game meat?" And the guys are thinking, "Oh, we don't want mushrooms, but sure, you can have some game meat." So they were completely comfortable with the game meat. But that's you're right. There's a couple of events that Nundle allows you to almost have like that idea of a deer camp. You can have that. You can be there for a week. You can be pretty comfortable. One thing about being cold is you don't sweat. It's more comfortable. Once you're warm, it is much more comfortable. You can eat well. You can relax, and you can have that kind of deer camp feel. And that's what I certainly have enjoyed about the 4 or 5 times I've been to Nundle, that deer camp feel where there's a big group of people and you're all very happy when each other's having success.
Yeah, and it's a great way to bring the young ones into it, because deer camp is deer camp. Things happen in the deer camp in that we're butchering animals, and we've had people come that don't hunt, but they love the camp component of it. They're older guys that have been around the ADA for a while, and they come in purely to show their skills and help the young guys when deer come in. My very first trip there, I took 3 deer out on my very first trip into Hanging Rock. And when I got back to camp, I hadn't even put the handbrake on, and this guy was, "All right, let's go. I'm here, and this is what I'm here to do, and I'm going to break this thing down and show you exactly what to do." And it's fantastic, and we still see that happen when we get the big camps. But what I'm now enjoying, I've got Mr. 3-year-old with me, and your boys are a bit older than that now, but certainly, this year I took him along, and he was in the camp with the men around the fire, toasting a marshmallow, cooking some damper, breaking down a deer, not being there with the full violence of taking an animal and subjecting him to that quite yet. As a 3-year-old, I'm not scared of that, but I'm mindful that I don't want to shock him. But he can start to be part of that process with the butchering and those bits and pieces, and he's quite okay with it. And next year we'll do a little bit more and a little bit more, and it's a great way to bring them in. And we're seeing a younger crowd come through. We're seeing a lot more partners, husbands and wives, or boyfriends and girlfriends getting into the sport. And in some cases, and this might sound wildly sexist, but the women don't necessarily want to do the killing. Not that this is a bloodthirsty sport, but they don't want to pull the trigger. But they do want to be part of harvesting a good quality protein for the table. And we're finding more couples getting involved in this pastime to do that. And deer camp is a great place to do it because there's lots of story, there's lots of banter, there's lots of fun.
Yeah, look, about that with children and so on, I found that for me fishing was the transition. Understanding that when because my boys have fished from an early age, and understanding that fish equate to the table, and understanding the process of how that happens, I felt that that's made that transition to warm-blooded game animals much more comfortable for my boy, especially my eldest. He completely he still kind of goes, ugh, but he understands exactly what's happening, and he doesn't do it in any kind of way that's he's he doesn't enjoy it or he doesn't, but like anything, he kind of goes, oh, there's guts there type thing. And so when he's at the age that he's been with us a couple of times when we've taken animals, and pass him a knife and say, okay, just do a little bit, back straps are pretty good, just nick along there, just nick along there, just nick along there, and understand that. And I mean, but that's the joy of having that kind of structure where there's a series of adults and you're all kind of supporting each other. And so, there's a bit of load carrying with the younger guys and those people who aren't hunting because there's a support mechanism. And that, that deer camp idea, I think that's a fantastic idea to introduce people. So yeah, if you're wanting to go hunting, there is a number of trips to places like Nundell through the ADA, especially ADA in Queensland. And so, that's a good way to start as well. If you didn't want to launch off by yourself, going to one of those events would certainly give you a great start.
Yeah, you got 30 blokes in camp with different setups. You don't need to have all the gear.
No.
You can start in this thing without a huge investment. The one thing that I really love about this series of parks is that it's great for rifles. It's a beautiful bow hunting block. In amongst those pines, every couple of meters, you've got something to hide behind. And they're there all in a row, planted like they should be. And it's a great place for people that get into bow hunting. And I certainly like bow hunting there. It's also open to doggers, the guys that are coming in at night time and they can dog it under spotlight. So that's fine as well. So it's got something for everybody. But if you can get into a camp like that and have a look around other people's setup, you'll soon learn what works and what doesn't. I was not counselling, but giving some advice to a fella today in our branch who was asking about wet weathers, and I've told him what I believe he should get. And he's like, oh, bit expensive. I said, yeah, but you know what? Wet weathers is like your repurb. When you need it, and you don't want it leaking. You really don't skimp on some stuff. And you'll learn some of that when you go to a place like this because, people will be bringing out some of their top quality equipment that they only get to use every now and then because it demands that in a place like Nundell.
That's a really good point because exactly what happened to me. I used to use a set of binoculars. They were good quality store-bought binoculars. When I used them in Nundell for the first time, I realised they weren't good for hunting. And when I was in the pine, I went, I can't see anything. I thought, that's it. This is where that high quality low light glass comes into play. This is the difference between something nice in a store and you're in a shopping centre and you look at them, you hang up and go, oh, these things are crystal clear, in all this artificial light. Or you look out through a window and it's a bright daylight outside and you're going, this is fantastic. When you're in that situation, that's when you go, okay, that's why you buy gear like that. That's why you spend the money on that kind of stuff because that is the test of it. And that was it for me. The optics. Nundell was the place that I first learnt that optics matter.
It's a good point. Very good point. Something I didn't say before, and I didn't notice this when I first started going into Ponderosa, but be aware that the leeches are there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're going to get those.
I'd never seen them there before. I got them in Tugalo. I'd never had them at Hanging Rock or in Nundell around Ponderosa, but we've had some pretty fun leech experiences in there. So take yourself a nice bottle of table pouring salt and that's the easiest way to get them off. That's not an old wives' tale. They'll release and they'll fall off, and then you can do whatever you want to make sure that they don't bite you again. But don't pull them off. They'll leave their teeth in there and they'll become an itchy bloody spot on your leg for the next, I don't know, however many months. And don't let them get too far up your leg because they can get quite hectic. Anyway, that was my last tip, Mark.
That's true. It is the perfect environment for them. It's not temperate, but it's certainly it's got a rainforest type of feel to it. So yeah, the leeches are there, that's for sure. And I don't think I've ever had too many problems with ticks there. maybe in summer it might be different. Never had much problem with ticks, but certainly leeches there. But then again, never had too many problems with things like, snakes or mosquitoes or anything, or flies like that there. But again, I think that might be the fact that I'm generally there in the colder months, but certainly, yeah, leeches are there, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I've never had major issues with blowflies. Even hanging here in the trees for 4 or 5 days has never been an issue. If you get it in the shade, in a shady area, there's not going to get a lot of sun. It's going to stay at a reasonable temperature for quite a few days, and that's always been fine. Have stepped on around a couple of snakes,
Okay.
but they're not common. You're right. I've been there a lot of times, and there's only been a couple, but they're there. They're certainly there. So keep your eye out for those. And like you said, wombats. Don't be scared of the wombat noise, because it actually helps you. I say the same about the roos and the wallabies. As long as you're not scaring them, they know you're there and you're not encroaching on them too quickly. They make noise just like you do. And don't be afraid if you snap a twig that your game's up, because it's not the case.
Right.
These animals do it all the time. So, but my message is get out there and do it. It's a fantastic park. It's in the New England area. So for Queenslanders, it's going to take you 6 hours to get down there, to be honest with you, if not a little bit more from Brisbane. But if you're going for a period of time, I can guarantee you by the time that first fire is going and you're talking about how long that trip was, you'll forget all about it and you'll be well immersed in a wonderful space. So,
and it's not a hard drive, but it might be 6 hours, but it's not a hard drive.
No, not at all.
Straight down the highway, lots of amenities along the way. You don't need to rush it. You'll get there. And once you're in there, it's well worth the effort. So yeah, that's probably about it for me. I can't think of anything else with Nundle or the Nundle system. No.
But if there are questions, just like any other one, feel free to ask them. Email address is thehunterscampfire@gmail.com. Fire your questions into there, and we'll be sure to answer them, potentially in a Q&A to follow this one, or we'll directly answer them via return email. So that's fine. But with that, I think probably done for Nundle.
I think we should say that that's our first email address. So if you're listening, please use it. We've set up specifically for this podcast. So yeah, you'll get both Ian and I, and it'll give us a great idea of how we can help you. So we're pretty excited that we've got that there and established. So the invitation is there to use it. Please contact us and we'll see what we can do.
Excellent. Righto. Talk to you in a week.
You will talk. That's right. Yes, you will. And so, new antique gun next time, and hopefully we'll have a guest to talk about one of the forest hunts, or we'll cover off on another forest. We'll see how we go.
Yeah. Good luck on Friday. Hopefully you get away. We'll be thinking of you, and we'll see the photos or the evidence of it at the beginning of our next chat.
I really do hope so.
All right, mate. Good on you. Good luck. Safe travels.
Thanks very much, mate, and speak to you again.